No,
For recording. Recording in progress.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. We're here this evening for the video conference presentation update by Kendi Keese Collaborative to the Ascension Parish Council and Planning Commission on the modification of the Unified Land Development Code and the growth management issues in our parish. Since the event is a public event, we will have to follow certain protocols, and one of those being a public comment period. The public comment call number is 225-621-8636, and the participant code is 939496. So anyone watching that wants to make a comment, simply call in that number and do the participant code and make your comment. There will be a 15-minute call-in period, and that will be concurrent with the presentation for the first 15 minutes. And if need be, we'll be interrupting the presentation for those comments, okay? And now I'll turn it over to Mr. Jerome Fournier, our Director of Planning and Development for Ascension Parish, to begin the presentation.
Thank you, John. Can everyone hear me? Okay, great. I'd like to reintroduce Tarek Farry Wifley of Kindy Keys Collaborative, our consultant working in the update rewrite of our Unified Land Development Code. Accompanying Tarek from Kindy Keys is also Ashley Woolsey. We regret that we had to postpone the council district tours this week, but with COVID, we thought it was the prudent thing to do. And we'd like to reschedule those tours in March or April of this year. We think it's important to receive information about your district from you driving the roads and getting a feel for where you are with the issues that address your district, right? Tarek will provide an update from the presentation made to the Council and Planning Commission last year. Staff has had weekly Zoom conferences with Tarek and his team, and we've been in communication with them every week during this process. And we've been reviewing documents and things of this sort that he's been providing us, right? And with that, I'll turn it over to Tarek. Thank you very much for your audience tonight, and we'll be open for questions later.
Thank you very much, Jerome and members of council. I share the sentiment that it was a shame we were not able to come visit you this month, but assure that we will make up for that lost time later this spring. And maybe COVID will have dissipated severely by then. Anyhow, I'm going to keep it short tonight. I will not move too fast. I've got 19 slides, and including this one. So, and a terrier.
Everybody mute, please.
Okay, sorry about that. People have arrived at my house after school, and my dog loves that time of day. So let's jump right in. I'm going to tell you what we're going to talk about. We're going to just start with a quick overview of our entire scope of work, which we do with each presentation. We're going to go through the diagnostic refresh, we've called it. Remember, the first part of our diagnostic was really solely focused on the growth management issues, whereas tonight we'll go through some of the other findings that we've had since our meetings in November. And then we have also prepared some interim ULDC updates and wanted to give you the status of those. Remember, as part of our scope of work, these interim priority code updates are intended to solve some of the challenges that you face immediately that you would like to have adopted prior to the expiration of the development moratorium this April. So that will be towards the tail end of the presentation. As a reminder, we kicked things off last year. We had our first kickoff trip where we had lots of stakeholder interviews. We met with you, council, and the Planning Commission, and we learned a lot. We drove around, we saw some things, but we haven't seen it all yet by any means. But we have some ideas on how we can improve the overall structure of the code, how we can improve some of the standards, how we can address a lot of the concerns that we've heard about. And we have rolled into these priority code updates, as I mentioned. And then following that period, we're going to get into the full Unified Land Development Code and update the entire document, make it a modern code for you, make it user-friendly, make it easy to administer, easy to enforce, easy to understand. And we'll be asking for your adoption of that document in about 17, 18 months from now. So it's a lengthy process, but trust that we're making great progress, and you have a great team of staff supporting us along the way. So this diagnostic refresh, again, this is additional detail on some of the earlier concepts that we highlighted previously. We're going beyond the growth management tonight with this diagnosis to address some of the other issues with your code. We're going to talk about modern zoning and subdivision practices and just building a cohesive body of regulations for you. You remember this table, I'm sure. And one of the concepts for reworking the current lineup of zoning districts in Ascension Parish is looking at your residential zone districts and treating them with a variety of different development options, starting with conservation style development, which is exactly as it sounds. You are conserving a lot more of a particular property in exchange for providing additional open space. You're doing less dense development, but there's a community benefit for developing like that. Now, if you get into the opposite end of that spectrum, which is either cluster subdivisions or mixed and infill residential development, you're developing at a higher density, but because of that, you're providing a lot more open space than would be required with conventional type development. And so therefore you get a density bonus at that point. And so we walked through this chart with you a few months ago. We haven't done the drafting of this in the code yet, but I just wanted to mention that concept, that there are trade-offs as you treat development districts like this, recognizing that not every site is the same and it's not a one-size-fits-all approach across the parish. Now, in addition to that concept, again, moving beyond some of the growth management issues, is to reclassify the districts. Right now, you simply list them in your code by name. You've got just a laundry list of all of the zoning districts. We like to reclassify those into residential, mixed use, non-residential, and then special purpose and overlays. Think of planned unit developments, think of traditional neighborhood developments. You have an industrial designation overlay that is different than your base zoning district. So we want to make sure that your community understands the differences between the different types of zoning. We want to make sure that we're providing a range of mixed use districts that allow both residential and non-residential, that serve the various contexts. Mixed use can mean a lot of different things depending on location. If we think about a potential new overpass to cross the river, what are some of the mixed use opportunities at an interchange like that? Now, that type of mixed use is a lot different than when you think about the neighborhood corner store tucked away into a quiet, well-established single-family neighborhood. And so we need to accommodate different types of mixed use. We'd like to rethink the industrial designation overlay. It's really just a rezoning to industrial land instead of an overlay. So we might make that transition as part of this process. Shifting from the zone districts, again, how the parish is divided into different districts and what types of uses are allowed within those districts. Well, again, right now you've got the tables at the beginning of your code, what is called the zoning tables section of the ULDC. And it's a laundry list of the land uses that are allowed in each of the different zoning districts. But there are some problems in that table format as it's currently drafted, and we'd like to fix some of those. One is that a binary approach has been applied largely. And when I say that, I mean it's either a permitted use in that district or it's prohibited in that district. We'd like to see the parish find some middle ground by defining a conditional use procedure that would say, well, it's not necessarily permitted by right in that zoning district, but given some guideposts, given some specific parameters and standards in place, we would consider that use as a conditional use permit, which would require a public hearing prior to gaining approval for that use. We also recommend, as you see the table here on the screen, that right-hand column, we can link to specific standards that would apply to each one of those land uses. Now, this table comes from another community. This is not Ascension Parish's code that you're looking at there, but we'd like to build a table similar to this for you. So bed and breakfast is a perfect example. In fact, you list bed and breakfast as a permitted use in 3 districts in Ascension Parish, but there are no standards included, and there's no link to those standards. So how do we regulate bed and breakfasts? What types of standards might be in place for the on-site manager, the hours of operation? How big can these facilities actually be before they actually become a hotel and no longer a bed and breakfast? So lots of improvements that we can do. And if we'll take the example of accessory dwelling units, which is a very hot topic across the country, everybody's dealing with it. You are probably hearing a lot about this too. They're not appropriate everywhere. Some places are better than others, but people want to build accessory dwelling units. Well, give them a line in the land use table. Show the community where they're permitted, show them where they're not permitted, and then define the standards. When we look at ADUs, we ask, how big should they be? How tall can they be? Can they be detached over a detached garage, or do they have to be in a basement with a separate entrance? All of those things, we are very good at drafting those standards, and we've done the research to be able to do it for Ascension Parish. Shifting gears now into, so we've talked about what can I do and where can I do it in Ascension Parish. Now I'm shifting into how good does development have to be within the parish? And that is addressed by development standards. Should the parish have building design standards? Do you care to get in the business of defining what buildings look like, what the shape of those buildings are, what types of materials are appropriate, and which districts should those standards apply to? Can we rethink the landscaping standards? One good example of that is in your parking landscaping requirement. It just basically says the landscaping has to be located in the paved area of the parking lot. Well, that's not enough guidance for the development community or the general public at large. Let's instead say, every 20 spaces, you need to have a parking island with a couple of trees in it. Every 10 or 20 spaces, we'd like to see a swale that can help treat the water and slow the runoff from a particular site. Can we start introducing some low-impact development principles that allow water to move more naturally through parking areas? So we can address a lot of those things through the development standards. Same thing with lighting. How do we address the height of lighting? Is it appropriate? Should it be a one-size-fits-all approach? Or are there certain areas where the lights just shouldn't be as tall or shouldn't be as bright? How are we accommodating new lighting technology like LED? Not everything is the way that it was when your current code was drafted. So we'd like to bring it up to speed. We can do a lot for the parking standards as well. There are incentives to reduce parking within the traditional neighborhood design overlay, but we think that type of a concept might be applicable parish-wide, or at least in several additional zoning districts. We can take a look, and what you're looking at on the right-hand side is a data plot, and that comes from the Institute of Transportation Engineers, who has studied how much parking is required by cities all across the country and how those are working as it relates to trip generation. So we can use the data, the scientific side of it, to right-size your parking requirements, but there's also an art to it, right? There's the anecdotal references that we hear from the developers and from you all to say, no, we actually require too much parking for these types of uses, or we've seen over the years that we don't have enough parking for retail establishments. So we will put it on us to mix the science and the art of right-sizing your parking standards. And that bottom picture is a growing concern across the country. Not sure if it's a huge issue in some of your incorporated areas or in other areas throughout the parish, but stacking for drive-throughs is a much different ballgame today than it was even 5 to 10 years ago. Cities are having to hire traffic police to manage lunch and dinner traffic because drive-throughs have become so massive and so efficient at moving vehicles through the site, that it really creates an issue, especially when they're adjacent to surrounding neighborhoods. So we can bring the modern approach and make sure that that is incorporated into your standards if that is something you would like to address. More discussion required there. We will improve the subdivision standards, and we've already done some of this work through the interim code updates, but some things just need to be relocated to the development standards. Things like tree requirements and lot areas and widths, those aren't really subdivision. They just need to be relocated to an appropriate place so that it's easy to find those standards. Streets and alleys, we need to make sure that you have provisions for residential alleys. And if we have cross sections that have been drawn in the engineering manuals, how can we reference those at a minimum, or even place them directly into the ULDC so that it's clear what you are asking for new subdivisions? And then take a hard look at the family partition procedure. First of all, right now it is referenced more as a variance to the subdivision standards. We're recommending that you just create a procedure called a family partition. That way, you're not really varying the standards. You just have a separate procedure when someone wants to do a family partition. And let's put some guardrails on that procedure too, just so that expectations are well communicated. Other procedural improvements are listed here. I won't read all of them, but one of them is an important one, and I've listed it first. With each procedure for development, whether it's a site plan, it's a preliminary plat, it's a final plat, it's a conditional use permit, regardless of the procedure, let's just list all of the steps in that process for approval once at the beginning of the procedures section. And then if there is something different within each individual procedure, then we will make that notation in that new procedure rather than listing the steps differently for each procedure. It just opens the door for inconsistency. So it's not a very big challenge for us from a drafting standpoint, but it does go a long way at making your code more user-friendly. We'd also like you to consider an administrative adjustment procedure. This is often referred to as kind of variance light. It's not a variance from the standards. Rather, it's a slight variation from anything that is quantifiable. When I say that, I mean, you can't say, well, no, your building design, we're going to give you an administrative adjustment for the design of your building. No, you can't do that because that's subjective, right? But you can give a 10% adjustment to building height or to fence height or to minimum front setback in certain situations. Now, we can draft this for you and ask your opinion as we go through that process, but a lot of communities are doing this so that the variance procedure is not being misused and so that you're not doing things behind closed doors just because they make good sense to give the adjustment in some cases. This last one, I guess I will cover. Nonconformities are a big problem. When something is nonconforming, that means it was legal at the time the code, your old code was adopted, but because of changes over time, it is no longer conforming to the standards of the parish. So you, like many communities, have addressed nonconformities in terms of nonconforming lots and nonconforming uses. But there's a whole other range of things that can be nonconforming, like signs, like other site features, like landscaping, fencing, parking. And so we would like to expand your nonconforming procedures so that it's very clear what happens to me as a property owner if I'm on if I have a nonconforming issue on my property. Can I still get a loan from a bank? Can I still do an expansion of my building? Is it going to be problematic? Well, no. Let's clarify that in the code so that people are not chasing their tails worried about the future of their property. Okay. That was it on the additional diagnosis. the last couple of slides here, I just want to share with you some of the high points from what we've been working on since we saw you all in November. These interim code updates, again, with the expectation that you could adopt these prior to the expiration of the moratorium. Our process has been as follows. We divided the updates into a couple of batches. We gave to staff batch 1 last week, and that covered fences, connectivity, traffic, primarily. Some other issues covered in there too. Batch 2 is really going to be focused on the drainage issues. So as you can see, these are the things we heard most about from all of you and from the members of the public. Ascension Parish has a traffic problem. Ascension Parish has a drainage problem. We're trying to tackle those big issues in these 2 batches. And they're coming down the pike, and they're coming down the pike fast. But we're trying to make it very straightforward what those changes are. So we have proposed the batch to staff. We will receive edits on those, and then ultimately they will go to the Planning Commission and then to the Parish Council for review and adoption. These drafts, eventually, we had to draft them in your current structure of the ULDC. So we have designed it as such. They might not look modern, and you might think, well, I thought these guys were going to give us a modern code. We will, but for these interim adoptions, they need to be able to immediately plug into the current structure of your ULDC. So we have drafted them as such. Let's walk through just the bullet points of each of the amendments we've proposed so far. It's a new fence permit procedure. The idea is to make sure that it is cheap, fast, and easy. These are supposed to be approved in 1 or 2 days with minimal fee, if any, and be very easy to administer both at the staff level and the mom and pop who just want to put a fence up in the backyard. It's problematic because of the picture that you see here. Fences in the drainage ways, fences within the servitudes. The parish wants to know where people are putting fences so that they can have a conversation and open the dialogue on appropriate location for them. We have revised the preliminary plat procedure to clarify the 60-day clock for approval, to have more of an upfront discussion with the developer prior to the application being submitted, so that there's greater opportunity to fix any issues before it is submitted and under that 60-day review, because then it's just going to be recommended for denial if you don't figure things out. We've established some new approval criteria, but we want to mention we are still noodling with this process. Your legal team is reviewing. We're still looking at state statutory authority and how much we can push the envelope here. It might be that we consider a preliminary plan or a concept plan procedure that would be before you get to preliminary plat or final plat stage, just to bounce ideas off of the Planning Commission and get a feeling for whether or not a project would be feasible. The next is access and connectivity. Remember, connectivity is a big issue. It has to do with how traffic moves either freely or does not move freely on your major collectors and on your arterials throughout the parish. We have defined the thresholds for where connectivity standards would apply. Any subdivision with 20 lots or more, subdivisions adjoining vacant land that is yet to be developed would have to stub out, with the idea that a future connection would be required. Now, for existing subdivisions that don't have sidewalks, maybe they don't have subsurface drainage installed, there might be the ability for Planning Commission to waive the connectivity standards and say, yeah, it wouldn't make sense to connect to there because you might be creating a safety issue. But for all others, these new connectivity standards would apply. And those standards are putting the stub outs for future connections, multiple access points for larger subdivisions, 2 access points for 50 lots or more, 3 for 100 lots or more. You're going to have questions and comments about these, and I'm happy to discuss them. But this is a good starting point for discussion. Finally, we made some amendments to the traffic impact analysis. Right now, it is listed as an attachment to your ULDC. It is written as policy language and not as mandates. A TIA study is a mandate. It is a requirement. So we have redrafted it to read like a requirement. We have clarified that the parish would hire a third-party engineering firm to conduct the traffic impact analysis. They would go through an RFQ process to hire that firm or multiple firms. The engineer, that hired engineer, would attend those pre-application and scoping meetings with the developer and with staff. And then the developer can work with that engineer to discuss any issues before they would even get to the point of submitting an application and before the preparation of the actual TIA. We have clarified what has been a big problem, which is the capacity analysis that is reviewed as part of that traffic impact analysis just says that the intersection has to perform at an overall level of service D or better. But that doesn't address if two legs of the intersection are actually at an F. You're still approving projects because it might average out at an LOSD. That has created problems. And so we want to make sure each leg of an intersection is operating at a level of service D or better. We've also included just some additional traffic mitigation methods that could be considered as part of that process, such as reducing the size and scale of the proposed subdivision until it fits within what would be appropriate for a level of service D. So a lot of analysis there, a lot yet to discuss. A quick reminder, and then we'll open it up to questions here. When we get into the drafting of the entire code, remember, right now we're working within your existing structure, but when we draft your new code, we're drafting it in the cloud. We're drafting it on the images that you see on the right-hand side there. We're going to do that in iterations. We'll do a first module, which will probably be zoning districts and land uses and development standards. And then the second module will probably be all procedurally related issues, so that you'll have an opportunity at several checkpoints to give us feedback, to give us comments before we knit all of those comments into a single unified land development code and ask that to go through the public process for adoption. You will be left with a user-friendly platform like you see here that is very easy to maintain and very easy to keep up to date as you're making amendments to your ordinances. So I'll stop there. That gives us about 16 minutes or so for questions to keep it under the 45-minute mark. And my dog is barking again, so I'm going to hit mute just for 1 moment.
Okay, thank you, Tarek. This is John Cagnolati back in front of you after they clear the screen. First matter of business is to check with the Secretary. Cinnamon, have we had any calls?
No calls.
No calls. Okay. With that in mind, are there any questions? I guess I'm going to address council members first. I need to get that Ascension Parish off my screen so I can see the participants.
Oh, I will stop sharing. Sorry.
Okay. All right, there we go. Looking at the screen, I see one raised hand, that being Aaron Lawlers. Aaron, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm off mute. Very good. Surprised. First of all, good presentation. I had a couple questions and they just kind of jump around. I heard you talking about the overlay districts, and I don't know the legality of all this. Is it possible to have architectural, and I don't need an answer right away so that can be researched and sent to me, an architectural type of overlay that would require certain standards in design, materials, landscaping, signage, all of that? And I think you alluded to some of that, but in one of the areas that I think would be beneficial is like along Highway 42 to kind of beautify the area. Is that the type of thing that's possible, or do you need certain requirements to legally allow us to do that? And I have a couple other questions, but no.
Okay, that's a great question. I'll answer it briefly and let you move on to your others. Yes, it's possible to do that through overlay district. That might not be the best solution, especially when I think about Highway 43. I think when we present to you a new lineup of base zoning districts that might include additional options for mixed use, we can just put those standards directly into a mixed use district so that it's not overlaying anything. It just is what's required on that piece of property.
Okay, very good. Thank you. I'm going to skip my question on family partitions, move on. The administrative adjustments, can you explain the process of that a little bit?
Sure. So administrative adjustments, these kind of run the gamut at how they're treated by different cities and counties and parishes around, but sometimes you give that authority to the director. In fact, in most cases, it is through the director, with the whole reason being, this is just an adjustment that makes good common sense. There are guideposts around it. You can call it 5%, 10%, call it 2 feet, whatever you set those parameters at. It gives you a little bit of wiggle room when there are certain unique situations that come up. Gives Jerome and his staff the ability to say, yeah, actually your site's a little bit different here. Fine to do 2 feet adjustment on that side, but you can't do more than that, because that then would require a variance, which requires a public hearing. Now, sometimes communities would say, no, we really don't want that at the director's purview. We want it to just go through as part of whatever other application type they're going through. So if it's anything that would require approval by the planning commission, they would also make the decision on the administrative adjustment at that point.
Okay, that answers that question. 2 more. Number one, the batch 1 you had mentioned. Can we be sent a copy of that? Because I'm always interested in the evolution of how the laws start and how they transform over time. If you would send us a copy of that, whoever wants it, I guess.
Well, yeah. Our first copy goes to staff, and then that's really our first checkpoint. And then as they give us feedback that, no, you got that wrong, or no, you missed something technical, then we clean it up and then it will be ready for distribution. So drafting a code is a little bit of sausage making. And although I understand you like to see how things evolve, we need it to be buttoned up before we can share that widely.
When you say it goes to staff, is that your staff or parish staff?
Parish staff.
Okay, I'd still like a copy of that though, but we can get to that later on. We're paying for this, so it's ours. But moving on, that's something that we can certainly cover later on, but I'd certainly like to see a copy of that regardless. You had mentioned, and this was very important to me, that AP has a traffic problem. We certainly do have a traffic problem, but our traffic problem is more appropriately characterized as a funding problem. We have a master plan that would really resolve a lot of our issues. The problem is we don't have the money to fix it. Is that something that y'all are looking at? Because I can tell you, everybody loves to talk about, hey, we need more traffic infrastructure, we need more turn lanes, this, that, and the other. We flat out don't have the money for it. So anything that's going to be proposed is, hey, you need, this, this, and this. Well, a lot of that we know. What we need is a way to pay for this. Is that going to be part of this presentation? Not this presentation, but these recommendations?
I will say yes, but to that. So partially, yes. It does go outside of the scope of what a unified land development code can do. We can draft your regulations in a way that we're not exacerbating an existing traffic problem. And that is really the focus of our work here. Remember that we're working with Tischler Bice, though, who is looking at the infrastructure. They're looking at different funding mechanisms. They're trying to find a path forward for how you might address some of these issues. One of them might be looking at better regional opportunities, and maybe that comes through a fee structure, maybe something else. But separate project, yes, but certainly tied into the work that we're doing here.
Yeah, I remember that they were working on that. That's why I asked. So I want to make sure we're still on that, because as I said, we've got a plan. And even if we develop something within the ULDC that doesn't further exacerbate the system, that's going to do nothing to fix what we already have. And I think everybody would agree we're at a point now that we have traffic problems. Just stopping what we have, and if we don't fix anything, that's never going to solve what we have now. So we really have to figure out a way to pay for solutions to where we are now and to maintain everything. That's all the questions I have, Councilman, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Next hand up was Terry.
Thank you, John. I appreciate the recognition. My questions are less complicated than Aaron's. I notice when we have a non-conforming use, that's a huge challenge for me. And what I would love to know, is there a way in the code to encourage non-conforming use situations to come into conformity?
Yeah, absolutely there is. And there's kind of a trend with dealing with non-conformities to just ease up on them because what local governments are realizing is that getting something on the property is better than nothing on the property. And once you've deemed a site non-conforming, over years, you're going to see just dilapidation. People will not maintain them because they can't get the funding to maintain them. They can't take care of their property because the parish has called them non-conforming. So I will get to a direct answer of your question. Letting them do more things on a property is one way to bring them into conformance, but also encouraging them to bring their property into conformance is a little bit more challenging, right? If they're a gas station and they're not allowed to be a gas station on that site, how do they bring it into conformance other than changing the use of that property? We often see vacant properties where they have left the building and nobody can move into it because there's not an appropriate land use that's allowed in that district. One thing that we can do through this process is open up to additional uses that might be permitted on certain properties. In Indianapolis, I drafted the code for them. We actually had a separate type of use that was called a V or for vacant use. And what that meant is if the property has been vacant for a period of more than 5 years, you would allow it in that zoning district because something is better than nothing. But we can strike that balance for you to try to be more flexible with nonconformities, but still ultimately with the goal of getting rid of them over time.
Thank you. My second question was similar in that we have fences in our drainage services. How do you suggest that we get those out? What is it? I know we can prevent them from putting more by requiring a permit, but how do we address the ones that are already there? What is that going to take? And do we need law to support, ordinances to support the ability of our code enforcement folks to remove those fences?
So, as you know, ordinance updates are not always going to apply retroactively. They will be non-conforming, right? If there's a fence in the servitude, the fence shouldn't be in the servitude, and that's already a requirement today. So, like you've alluded to, it's an enforcement challenge. Step up enforcement. If it's causing real problems, go out and have conversations with those folks and get to the bottom of it.
Thank you. So I'd also like to just express the engineer issue hiring or doing an RFP for a TIA. I think that's a great idea, but on its face, I would like to see more than one. I don't think it's a good idea as we move forward to have a pet engineer either. I think that we need to have fairness and more than one firm hired for that purpose, or at least qualified to do those jobs.
Okay.
Okay, Terry, thank you. Next was Michael.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I kind of want to piggyback on what Councilman Lawler and Councilwoman Cazzo just said. So the TIA, I love the idea of a third party, and I agree with Councilwoman Cazzo. It should not be just one firm. It should be multiple firms that rotate in and out depending on, any kind of a rotation system we have. I think I think one of the biggest concerns previously of doing that was funding. That the parish would have to come up with the money to pay those engineering firms. Now, I wanted to kind of just run this idea by you real quick and just see if like this is kind of what you guys had in mind. Currently, we do have traffic impact fees, and we're not charging 100% of those fees. So would you recommend that we maybe charge like 100% of those fees and use a little bit of that extra money to help cover the cost of this now third-party engineering firm?
TBD. We haven't worked out those funding details of it, but that is an idea, and now we've captured it. Again, Tischler Weiss is really helping us on that arm of this equation.
Yeah. Okay. That's what I was thinking, because I know that's kind of been something that Councilman Lawler and myself have been really trying to push through in the past couple of years with transportation, is to get those fees increased so we could do more things like this. So yeah, I'll keep an eye out for that from you guys going forward. Thank you so much.
And Jerome is furiously taking notes.
Yeah. Next, folks, we're running short on time. It's 5:41. I got to log off of this at 5:45. So I've got 3 more hands. I'll call them in order. Make your questions brief, or I'll have to cut it off, and then we'll submit questions to Jerome, and he'll get with Tarek and get those questions answered, okay? Next would be Kent. I'm sorry, Wade Scheck-Snyder. I'm sorry. I know
that's all right. I was wondering at first. No, and I just want to just kind of ask, and this is more of a general question from a planning and zoning issue, is we are fast running upon this, the time limit that we have for our moratorium, and we all want this to be a very successful event for nothing not to be accomplished. Is when it would be a potential time that we might have to look at potentially asking for an extension? Is that something that we need to have from a planning and zoning standpoint in order to adhere to some of these immediate changes and give the potential applicants time to make those adjustments? And can we have some type of idea on that and achieving a good timeline?
That doesn't sound like a question for me. In fact, we have designed an aggressive schedule to make sure that you don't have to ask for any extension of the moratorium, but I will defer to staff and others if they prefer to answer differently.
Next, I have Dempsey and Joel. I'll try to get to you. If not, I apologize. But Dempsey, go ahead. Unmute, Dempsey. You're muted.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, I guess we need to go with, Tuesday we were supposed to have the district tours. As you know, the state now, they are announcing a lot of money and a lot of projects coming out to the parishes. I'd like to know when they were going to, when they're going to schedule the next tours. And, I know it's an aggressive timeline here, but we need to have some input. And also, are they dealing with the state? I know they're dealing with our staff, but are they looking out further than just, our parish here?
Short answer, the 1 minute speed dating answer. Yes, we are looking outside of the parish. We're not working with individuals who work for the state. We are working under the purview of state law and your attorneys to help keep us in line. We're always interested in new ideas and funding opportunities to make sure that you're set up. And not sure when those trips will be rescheduled yet. We're going to work with Jerome.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Joel, are you still on there? I think we can squeeze you in. Somebody's got to mute. Their phone is ringing. Joel, are you still on?
Christina's iPad needs to mute.
Joel? Apparently he signed off. I guess that should wrap it up, folks. We appreciate it. For anyone who has other questions for Tarek or the administrator, for Jerome and his group, please get those to Jerome and he'll take care of getting answers for you. And there again, thank you all for joining us. We'll sign off now and we'll be convening our parish council meeting in about 15 minutes.
Thanks all. Stay healthy.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tarek. Appreciate it.